Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Ecommerce Joe. In today's episode, we speak with new entrepreneur Mark at the start of his e-commerce and business journey. Since Mark's at the very start of his journey, we're speaking about a lot of business basics. A lot of the questions that Mark asks are really relevant to new sellers, so if you're getting started, pay close attention to this episode. Since mine and Mark's call went on for about 2 hours, we've decided to split this episode into two. In the first one, we cover all the basic questions that business owners should be asking. And in the second one, we actually have a screen share of Xero, and I walk Mark through the basics and give him a rundown of how Xero works. It's a really good episode for beginners, so I really hope you enjoy it. Let's get on with the show. So yeah, Mark, if you want to give a bit of extra context, we can go from there.
I thought it just might be helpful, just in terms of some of the questions and where they may have come from. So during the COVID period, naturally, a lot of people around me, friends, associates, all picked up on an idea of perhaps starting up doing their own online retailing, especially because for the BAME community, especially, so Black and ethnic minorities, we realised, well, we can't actually get a lot of the stuff we buy in stores because we're still used to these stores online, and it's quite difficult to get these stores online. So let's try and help them out and be that buffer. So it gave birth to all of these pocket ecosystems around healthcare products, around cultural products, around music. So there's a group of us, and naturally we're all intermediate, so you do what you can, read on YouTube to understand what to do, how to set up an online retail. Gave us a lot of us are intermediates when it comes to business, starting up a business, understanding what's required, what it's like to run an online retail. So the advice we were given was to leverage another platform, so you can understand by reading their policies, by selling on their platforms, what sort of things to be worried about. So that's how we joined Amazon, one of the most powerful online platforms, and also eBay before creating your own, say, Shopify or Etsy account to go with them. But there's so many hurdles you forget or you take for granted, and I guess bookkeeping is just the first one.
Yeah.
So it won't just be me. The plan is, once I understand, I can, if this is useful, then give them a link to your video or to your content to say, hang on, this is what we're doing wrong. But it's from a context of perhaps a lot of YouTube self-learning, a lot of and not very good stuff. So when we spoke before, I mentioned there's not much on UK online retails, on e-commerce on UK at all. It was one of the things I fell in love working with your website and working with your team. Originally got me here because they were UK, so you understood what we were trying to do here. So that's why some of the questions that we may ask may come from a really basic background of the principles of bookkeeping, why you need to do it. For them, they're starting to hit the VAT thresholds very quickly now because of the volumes they have to buy. So similar to me, they'll have those questions around how you can use Xero to help you, and then some of those pitfalls and gotchas.
Okay. Out of interest, how many people are in this sort of group of yours?
The WhatsApp group is growing. I think it's
all on WhatsApp. That's cool.
Yeah, that's how, like I said, we're trying to do that community learning. So how are you doing over there? What's some gotchas you can say? Oh, by the way, I just learned if you're sending items in the sealable plastic bags, you've got to put a sticker on them if it goes over a kid's head, because it means a kid could suffocate from them. Oh, great. I'm glad we learned that all together, because sometimes this is quite hard to find out unless you read the entire regulations, and even then you might still miss something. So we just formed a group. It's 50 people so far.
Wow, okay.
So I said I'd speak to you, see how well this worked. As soon as the content was out there, I'd post it. And I mean, initially they were hoping you were going to offer that package that we were speaking about before, like that sort of.
This might be better than that package though. Like if something, they can all do it for free.
That's what I've said, but I know I must admit they were disappointed. They were like, "Oh, really?" And I said, "Yeah." And I explained to them it's because of size, and then some of them explained, "No, they have hit that size." So I said, "Okay, great. See how you feel. You might want to reach out to him then if you're doing 100K plus." I think one person said in the group. So I said that feels right. I'm sure they said it was 50 plus. So you may find some benefit, but a majority of the group.
And to give some context for anyone watching this, what was it that people asked for that I said we potentially couldn't do currently?
I think it was that the nurture package. If I call it that, you offer on your website. So for e-commerce businesses doing the bookkeeping, helping around the annual returns, or more specifically that VAT piece, because it's such a minefield. So having
Because we do work with small businesses that are getting started, but it's probably that we're slightly more expensive than people want from the beginning. But that's because all my team are based in the UK. I've got to pay their salaries. It's not cheap having people that know what they're doing. Um, and so
yeah, and
it's
I think when we spoke about it, we changed the word inexpensive. I think you said you won't quite realize the commercial value of paying for my services just yet. So I know you said it, you used the word expensive, but I
yeah.
like the way you explained it to me before, where the benefit in using it doesn't quite balance out yet because of.
Yeah, and for us, we don't like not giving, I suppose, value to people. And like as a small business, one of the last things, well, one of the main things you need is money to begin with, and you don't want to be paying some guy, some accountant when you could be buying products and selling them. But if someone is making 100,000 or 50,000, and they've got a couple of £100 a month that they can budget to it, I'd say it's a worthwhile investment, whether it's us or someone else, another bookkeeper or another accountant, because the time and the headache it saves, I think, is huge. Like, I think you're quite organized and you're taking this head on. A lot of people don't. They just ignore it for a year, 18 months, and then there's this huge problem that's then got to be dealt with. And yeah, as you've kind of already started to see, there's so many factors to think about, which is income tax if you're a sole trader, national insurance, um, VAT when you cross the VAT threshold, and then
Or
plus
in
all of
our case, if you subscribe to it voluntarily because you have suppliers who request it.
yeah, exactly, yeah. Oh, that was it because you're registering early, so yeah, well, I remember
That
now.
was the biggest. So this is the heartbeat that led us here. It's we're in a or many of the people in the group are in a situation where because they want to work with these big suppliers, these suppliers often require you to be VAT registered. I guess it shows them some sort of credibility. I guess it
Hmm.
shows them the kind of turnover you're expecting to do, or maybe to do with them. And it just weaves out, as one said, all of the online retail arbitrage types
Yeah.
who be clogging up their real sales efforts.
Yeah, but if anyone does sign up with us as an accounting client, they don't need bookkeeping straight away. Um, if they don't have to have that VAT number, then they might not need to do bookkeeping and VAT returns. And then in which case we are usually happy to try and help. But then imagine now if you said, oh, there's 50 people that need help, even if we're charging them all something small, it would be difficult to say, like, to answer all of those questions in a nice fashion where it feels fair. Um, so I know they're disappointed, but hopefully something like this where we can do it like one to many rather than one to one
One to
might
one.
help. So then we've kind of done this. We've got a very loose structure. You sent me a few bullet points or a
Yeah.
few numbers through. Um, do you want to take the lead in asking the questions, and I'll do my best to try and answer them. And
Yeah.
then when it gets to the let's go over like the technical ones, I suppose, first, the generic ones, and then stuff for zero. I'm logged in on my screen into your Zero account. I can walk you through some stuff. And like I said,
Okay.
afterwards, I'll edit out any sort of sensitive um, information so that your like personal data is not being shown and that sort of thing.
Okay, I've got my notes here on this side. Um, I guess the big one is that the whole concept of bookkeeping. So I understand the idea of bookkeeping is to keep what comes in
Hmm.
as sales and revenue, and what goes out in terms of what you're spending, and I guess costs. Um, so what I guess I took for granted is how important it is for HMRC. So when we sign up, everywhere you see you're given these notices that remind you bookkeeping is important for your annual returns and for VAT. But I guess the concept of bookkeeping, or what actually is bookkeeping. So we know you're logging all your sales, but as I said before, we've made some mistakes perhaps where we've forgotten to keep receipts, because
Hmm.
actually we forget those items count towards costs. or perhaps asking for a receipt to begin with, because that's what you need to do as part of your bookkeeping. So it's just, if there was like a 1 paragraph or 1 minute explanation on those pieces, this is what it is, this is what it means to HMRC, the receipts, because I understand for some accounts we can just take a picture and a digital receipt's enough, but in some cases you might need a physical receipt. It was even, why do you need a receipt if they can just see the transaction and what we're doing now?
Yeah.
So anything you could just...
Sure. And then I realized one of the last, was it one of the questions? No, it wasn't. So one question that I think also was kind of in there but wasn't in there that I'll answer first was um, essentially, if you're a self-employed business owner, what are your actual obligations each year? Because you mentioned that annual return and bookkeeping, but then to answer the question of like, why do you need to do bookkeeping? It's, well, what are your actual obligations each year?
Yeah,
So when you're self-employed, you're also known as a sole trader. They're the same. You might see the like different word those words being used. Sole proprietors also used. Um, they all mean the same thing. So self-employed is just you're a sole trader. If you and so if you're running an online business and you're not a limited company and you're doing it all through your personal name, that means you're a sole trader. Once you're doing that, if you're earning above £2,000, you need to do a self-assessment tax return each year. And it's on your tax return that your sole trading income is declared. The tax return is always based, and the personal year is always based around the 5th of April. So the tax year goes from the 6th of April to the 5th of April every single year. So if someone's starting today, so it's October the 16th, if someone's starting today, their first year end would be the 5th of April 2021. So they actually wouldn't need to file anything straight away because their year hasn't happened, and you only file tax returns after the year. You can't do it in advance. The deadline for filing it is the January following the year end. So the current year end that we're in, or the current financial year, is 5th of April 2021. The deadline for that is the following January, so it'll be January 2022. And one thing that people find when they're getting started is they'll get scared and worried because they think, oh, I need to register straight away and I need to file taxes. But you don't need to. You only have to do it. You only have to file something after that first financial year end. And if you start, basically any time during that year, it's based on that year. It's really unlucky for people who start in like February or March because then they've got only like a couple of months of trading. In your tax return, and this is stuff that we deal with all the time for people, you need to include all your income from every single source. So it's not just sole trading. If you've got a job, most people know that they get a P60 every year. The P60 needs to go into the tax return. If you've got property, rental income, that goes in. Certain benefits need to go in. And yes, all of that stuff goes in. And usually the accountant's job is to sort that out. You don't need an accountant to do it. That's something as well I like to stress to people. Like, if you want to do it yourself, you can do it yourself, especially if it's a straightforward tax return. You can learn. But sometimes I'd say, again, the headache you save by like learning that, especially because it's something that's once a year, it's probably worth just paying someone else to do it. Do you think I've explained that okay so far?
No, you have.
Yeah. I know that you already kind of knew all that stuff, but yeah. So your question was like, why do people need to do bookkeeping? So when you do your tax return each year, you need to include your sole trading income, and in order to show that, you've got to show all your sales and then all your expenses. And the only way you can calculate that really is by doing bookkeeping in one form or another. So getting some, and if HMRC ever want to question it, and they don't always do it, but they can go back up to, I think it's 6 years.
Oh, wow.
And look at stuff. So you need to have, if you submit a tax return to them, you need to be able to show your workings. And if you've just made up figures, it's obviously going to be a really uncomfortable conversation that you're having with a tax inspector versus if you've got kind of something like Zero or spreadsheets where you can say, well, like this sales figure that I got of £50,000, that came from this entire column or range of data. Um, and the same goes for like the purchases. So they might accept it if you can show that you've got like really clear ways of calculating stuff. The tax inspectors are human, and most people are lazy and they just want to tick off kind of just and know that someone's done something properly. If
Mhm.
you have good records and you can say to them and they ask you, I want to see the 10 biggest invoices, or I want to see these 6 invoices. If you're able to straight away say, here they are, let me know if you want any more, they're more likely to be confident that you've done things properly. If your answer is, I'll get back to you, oh, I haven't got any, they're going to then start questioning, well, what, like, if this person hasn't got records, how do I know that the expenses they've put through are correct? And then they could potentially say, well, you've got no supporting evidence. I don't believe that these are expenses. You can't prove it. So I can see your sales, great, but let's remove all your expenses, and you actually now owe tax on your new profit figure, which is much higher. So it's really important. And for people who are online arbitrage sellers or selling slightly unusual products, um, you kind of need to prove that they're actually business expenses. And if you've
That's
just paid, like, let's say I'm paying you to do something, and it's not. Let's say you're a website designer, and I've just got a payment going out to you for £50 for designing my website. Be a very cheap website, but still £50, £50. So if I just pay £50 out to Mark, HMRC might say, well, is Mark your friend? You've just given £50 away. Like, how can you say that's a business expense? Whereas if I've got an invoice from Mark Web Design and it's got your tax number and it looks like an invoice, then they're more likely to say, oh, okay, that £50 was for that invoice and it says on it services rendered for a website. But it's again a much more like you're basically operating like a business. I mean, whereas
yeah.
so they're really important. There are certain rules around VAT receipts for less than £250, which I can't quite remember the technicalities off the top of my head. Like, but there's like a simplified method, and they might not push you too hard if you haven't got them. Um, but I would say it's always best practice to have as many invoices, especially purchase invoices, as possible, because then it's a more comfortable meeting and it puts a bit more confidence in the tax man. Um,
So what you're saying here is always ask for receipts if you can, when you can.
yeah,
If you're buying anything, try to ensure the receipts show the VAT on there.
if you're
So
VAT registered. If you're not VAT registered, it doesn't matter. But if you are, you definitely need to show it, because the key thing there is that in order to reclaim the VAT, and I suppose we need to then talk about how VAT kind of works, but in order to reclaim the VAT on your VAT return, HMRC will want to check that the person that you're paying and that you bought the products from was VAT registered. Because if Mark, the web designer, isn't VAT registered, I can't claim VAT back. But if he is, then I can. And again, HMRC don't know that if they just see £50 going out to Mark. Whereas if I've got an invoice from Mark Web Design with the VAT number on it, and you've split out on it, oh, it's for like £43 plus VAT, and that equals £50 or whatever it is. Then yeah, it's good. It's good for them, and they'll let you reclaim it.
that makes sense. That
Yeah,
makes sense. That makes sense. And then I guess the other piece was try and keep it for 6 years somehow.
yeah,
This
and
zero is
and
useful.
and this is one of the benefits of Zero. But you don't have to. Again, sole traders, they don't have to use Zero, and for some people the extra 20 or £30 a month is too much of an expense. Some people would rather do it on spreadsheets, and you can. The requirements for a sole trader are much lower than for a limited company. A sole
I think
trader,
we are a limited.
you're a limited company, yeah,
Yeah.
so you're using Zero because you need to show what's known as a balance sheet and your profit and loss statement. and Zero makes it really easy to prepare those. Whereas for a sole trader, if you sold on eBay or Amazon, you could take all the sales data from those locations and then prepare a spreadsheet of all your expenses, because you don't need to show at the year end how much cash you've got in your PayPal account, your Amazon account, your bank account, because you get the sole trader gets taxed on everything regardless of what's actually gone into their pocket. Whereas the limited company, because it's a separate entity, you need to submit accounts to the company's house. Do you want me to go over the filing requirements for a company, or
Yeah,
would that not be beneficial for your?
that would definitely be. So obviously everyone knows about the annual accounts, and then I guess for some of them who are VAT registered, it would be great.
Yeah. So limited companies need to file your annual accounts every year and a corporation tax return. The company year end is different to the sole trader year end, in that the company's year end could be any month in the year, and it's usually based on the month that they were formed. So if you form the company in October, your year end will usually be October, and you then have 9 months to file the accounts after your year end. So a lot of businesses either have December or March year ends, just because some people they just like the idea of it being a calendar year.
You change the year end afterwards,
You can, yeah, you can change it. You can't change it every single year. I think you can only change it once every 5 years. Um,
and then they do what you were just about to say, so change it so it follows a calendar year.
yeah, exactly. But I try to dissuade people from that, because so many people do it and this is like a selfish reason, because so many people do it in December and March, and VAT returns are done quarterly, and it always makes sense to align your VAT reporting periods with your year end, because it's quite neat if you have a December VAT return and a December year end than having a November or a January VAT return and a December year end. But what that's inadvertently done for us at the accountancy is that it means that we've got most people's VAT returns are due in the same quarter, because most people either, because December and January are 3 months apart. Sorry, December and March are 3 months apart. So the majority of people have that quarter, and it just, and that's the current actually cohort of people that we're dealing with now. And yeah, it's just always more manic on these months. Next month it calms down. The month after it's calm, but these 3 months,
So,
yeah, it's just yeah. So it's kind of selfish, being like, please don't do it. There's no benefit. So just slows down the grey hairs that are creeping in.
I
Yeah,
can't imagine how busy it must be.
yeah. Um, so yeah, you've got that, and then if your company is profitable and as a director and shareholder, if you're taking money out of that company, then you're also going to need to do a tax return, and your tax returns year end is also 5th of April. So your personal tax year end is 5th of April because you're a person. So yeah, if you're like yourself, if you're director and shareholder of a limited company, you need to do a personal tax return and the company tax return and the company accounts, and something else known as a confirmation statement, which is a really straightforward document you have to do once a year. It takes like not too long, 5-10 minutes, but you'll get a letter from Company's House, which is like the most scary, harshly worded thing ever. And it's like you're going to get an unlimited fine, you're going to get prison sentence, we're going to take your kids to prison, your families. It's like, whoa. It doesn't say anything about the kids, but yeah, like
Oh,
they just make it like the most over the top thing, and it's just, I've never seen them like give anyone even a pound penalty for it. They just want their £13 a year filing fee, and that's it. But it's, if anyone gets that, relax. Like, it's not that, file it. Obviously, you have to do it. But if it's late, don't worry. Just make sure you do it. You're not going to go to prison. Well, going to need a disclaimer there, like spin across the bottom. You know, you probably won't go to prison. It's not as bad as it looks, anyway. The most important thing is the accounts and the tax return. But to go back to your question on
you got to do
bookkeeping,
accounts, tax return, and then at some point they will make you do your own personal tax return because they picked up you're a director.
yeah, exactly. And similar to being a sole trader, If you don't have any dividends or have any not like taxable income to declare, you don't need to do a tax return in that year. But if you do, you'll need to do it based on the current year that you're in. So right now, your business has just got started. I've not been through the books for you, but we're going to presume that you've not made any money yet because you've just got started. So we're also going to say that you've not taken any dividends. Because you've not done that, you don't need to submit a tax return yet. If you don't take any dividends between now and the 5th of April, you don't need to do one for the 5th of April 2021. But if you do, let's say you have a really good December, you make £1 million, take out 750 grand in dividends, you buy me a drink, um, then you're going to need to do a tax return and declare all of that on it for the 5th of April 2021.
Is there a threshold?
Oh, for
You said
the dividends?
tax, yeah. Was there, you said because if you start paying yourself, so imagine is it from the second you start paying yourself, so even if you paid yourself £100 a month straight away?
If you're taking dividends, you can take £2,000 a year tax free, but usually at that point, I would still recommend doing a tax return because it's kind of rare that people only take that amount. So it's still worth registering and getting in the good habit of doing them when you start taking money.
So let's say you took like £1,000 in a year, as dividends. How would you then? So you just request the form, or the form would be sent to you just before April, and you would
Yes.
complete.
So it's not automatic. You have to tell HMRC. Yeah. You have to say, I need to do a tax return. I'm a director of a limited company. And then they'll register you and they'll give you what's known as a UTR number, which is your unique taxpayer reference.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's your number then for life, unless you become bankrupt. But yeah, that's your number. And then if you were a sole trader in the past, even if you stopped for a few years, you'll still have the same number. It will just be inactive. So anybody who's listening that has previously had a UTR and is needing to re-register, you'll end up with the same UTR again.
Okay. And so you'd register for online
self-assessment. Yeah.
And then it knows what you need to pay based on what you filed in Zero, or you have to physically tell it no, actually ignores it.
So HMRC don't have access to Zero. If you submit VAT returns to them, you submit them through Zero, and the data from Zero goes to HMRC, but they don't have access to go into it. For self-assessment, self-assessment in the name, you have to so you're the one that's self-assessing. You tell them how much tax is there to pay. So you can either submit a paper return, which has to be submitted by October, but most people these days do it online. And you can either you can create a government gateway account and do it through them directly, or if you work with an accountant, the accountant kind of writes to HMRC, says that you're their client, and then we submit it on your behalf. So you kind of don't have to worry about anything, but it doesn't yet go through Zero.
Okay, so in the example then for your balance sheet or your bookkeeping, you show that you've paid yourself dividends. I would have thought then because you submitted that to HMRC, they can say, oh yeah, I can see here directors' dividends have been paid.
Not yet. So there is actually, they were working towards that, I think, before Brexit and before COVID, where not for private companies, but for public companies. So let's say you own shares in Lloyd's, they pay out dividends, or they used to pay out dividends 4 times a year. There would be a public register of all the shareholders who got dividends. HMRC would have access to that. But for a private company, so your company, for example, it's smaller companies, it's less clear who the shareholders sometimes are and who got what. So that's the onus is still on you. So there are kind of ways of figuring out roughly how much was paid in dividends, but all the company has to do is say, here's my profit for the year, I'm paying corporation tax. That's it, depending on its size. You then, as the shareholder, have to say, here's my tax return, I earned this many dividends, I owe this much tax. So yeah, again, it's there's a lot of moving parts, which is why it's worth getting an accountant.
No, yeah. I think the other questions I have are more than, now I've got a bit more of a background, is more than about how you can make this all come together and stick in Xero.
Yeah. One other thing as well to I think I forgot to answer was about like what is bookkeeping or why do you need it? Bookkeeping is, and because it's a question we get all the time, bookkeeping is essentially the processing of all the data. So if you sell on Amazon and eBay, you're going to have transactions coming in from Amazon and eBay. You're going to be using PayPal, eBay managed payments, and Amazon payments will be coming in. Amazon payments have Amazon, before they pay you, they give you, you have sales, then they have all their fees, and then they give you some money.
Yeah.
Processing that and creating the figures, going through the bank account. So every day or week that you're purchasing goods from suppliers, you're gonna like categorizing whether it's categorizing whether it's website costs or subscriptions or cost of goods sold or salaries. That, like, making those decisions is what your bookkeeper would usually do. And because you can't just say this is sales, this is an expense. Ultimately that's what it all boils down to, but HMRC want all these things split out in a certain way, and the process of doing that is what bookkeeping is. Accounting, or at least how I see it, is the process of taking that data and then preparing it and giving it to HMRC and answering all of the technical questions that people have, figuring out how much tax someone's owed, thinking about if there are any things that could be done to make their tax situation a bit more efficient. For example, with the dividends, if someone has a full-time job and they know that they're quitting it to be to focus on their e-commerce business full time, if we got to their year end and we had the choice of taking dividends this year or next year, I'd probably say to my client, well, let's not take dividends this year because you'll get taxed on a higher amount of them, because you've already got a job and you've got tax allowances that you're already using. So what I would suggest doing is waiting, even if it's one day, so it's in the next financial year, taking the same amount of money, but you would potentially pay less tax because you're kind of using your allowances better just through timing. So that's kind of the accountant's job, and a bookkeeper, it wouldn't necessarily be doing that. Some good ones might, but yeah. Well, that's the end of part 1 of my video with Mark, and come back for part 2 where you'll see me speaking with him and walking him through how to use Xero. If you've got any questions about starting a business or running a business, or if you've got any questions about anything that Mark and I spoke about, please leave a comment below and I'll make sure that I get back to you. Thanks a lot. See you soon.